Hi, this is Dr. Mack at PacificEastAquaculture.com. I wanted to talk today about handling clams, acclimating them, and talk a little bit more about some of the other issues I've covered before about some misconceptions about clams. So these are cultured Maxima clams. I went to French Polynesia about 10 years ago and helped set up the clam farm there. And this is where we get these clams from now, from the farm over there. They also ship wild collected clams from there, and you can generally tell the wild collected ones from the cultured ones because they're larger. By law, they cannot ship wild collected clams smaller than 4.5 inches. So when I was over there, I met with the president of French Polynesia and the legislature, and we actually got the law changed to be able to ship these smaller cultured clams, because by law it said you can't ship clams smaller than 4.5 inches, but the cultured ones are generally in the 1.5 to about 3.5 inch range at the most. So you can always tell a cultured clam because it's going to be about 5 or 6 inches generally. A wild collected clam is going to be about 5 or 6 inches, and the cultured ones are going to be smaller. And generally the cultured ones have much more even shells. They're rounder and cleaner, whereas the wild ones can have misshapen shells and all sorts of hitchhikers. Even so, when we get these cultured ones in, the shells are pretty clean, but we still brush every single one. We also brush them before we ship them. And occasionally, when they first come in, we do occasionally find some pyramid snails on them. And not too many, because the cultured clams, the fluted areas are much smaller than on the wild clams, but that's generally where you find the pyramid snails if they're present. And as I say, we scrub each one when we first get them in, and we also scrub them before we ship them out again. So the likelihood of getting any type of hitchhiker, if you get a clam from us, is extremely low. But you still want to check them when you first get them in. So let's say you get the clam in, and it comes in a little plastic bag like this. Open up the bag and put the clam into a small container. So you see I have one in here already, and then I use this RO tubing. It's about 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch tubing, and I put a little valve on it, and we start a siphon. So we have one end in the tank or the sump, and we start a siphon. You can see about how rapid that should be. So it's drip acclimating, but it's not like a slow drip. It's a fairly steady drip, but not quite streaming. And acclimate the clam about 45 minutes maximum. So we don't need like a 2-3 hour acclimation. They're really not that sensitive, and you can run into problems over acclimating. Oxygen levels can drop in a little container like that, and you just have more problems than benefit from over acclimating. So about 45 minutes is generally sufficient. Then go ahead and pick that clam up and inspect the shell, and you can see I have it out of the water. Generally, that was thought of being a no-no, but really it's not, because you can see they close up tightly, and you want to inspect the shell. Clean it with a little soft bristled toothbrush, something like this. You probably have one that you use for your tank. You don't have to be that gentle with it. You can scrub pretty well, pretty strongly on the shell of the clam. It's not going to harm it. It's going to close up like this. So if it is still a little bit open, you don't want to scrub right on the mantle, you know, on the top part of the clam, but generally they're going to close up. And then you want to be a little bit careful around the foot area as well, down on the bottom here. So on this foot area, we'll talk about this a little bit. These clams want to attach. They're normally found in the wild embedded in rock, so they want to attach to a firm surface. Like this one is attached to a little piece of rubble. Like you can see, we keep them in rubble. So let me pick up one of these and we'll see what's going on. Okay, like this guy. So he's picked some larger piece of rubble to attach to. It's pretty firmly attached. So if you're scrubbing around that, not a problem. These smaller pieces here might just fall off. Sometimes when we ship them, this area can actually fall off, because what they're doing is they're sending out threads. Let me see if I can find one here. You can see this is maybe a little more loosely attached, and you can see some of the threads right there that they send out to attach to the rock rubble. Sometimes they'll drop that in the bag, and people will email me and say, oh, it's dropped its foot, I've got a problem, it's going to die. No, it hasn't dropped its foot. The foot, if you really want to call it a foot, it's not really a foot, but it's the area underneath this, and it's trying to attach, sending out these threads to attach to the rock rubble, and sometimes it has sort of a gelatinous look to it. I don't know if you could see that, like on this one. It's kind of a gelatin. You see the threads in there, and there's sort of this gelatinous material. So if we put this in a bag, sometimes this will drop off just from the stress of shipping, and that's perfectly fine. It's not a problem. If you just put it on a nice firm surface, it's going to reattach within a couple of days, and that really shows you whether the clam is healthy or not, whether it's attaching to a hard surface, because they want to attach and feel secure. So you want to put them on some rock rubble if you put them in the sand, or if you put them up on the rock work, that's perfectly fine, but it has to be somewhere where they're not going to fall over, because obviously if it falls off that rock and turns upside down in the tank, that's not good. So the clams live off the products of photosynthesis. They do not need to be fed supplementally. They also utilize dissolved organics like nitrates and phosphates. So generally, you're going to have some of that built up in the tank, and if you have a lot of fish in there and you're feeding them quite well, you'll have a little more in your tank than normal, and that's perfectly fine, and the clam's going to utilize that. As far as calcium need and draw on alkalinity and magnesium and all that, it's the same as any hard coral that you'd have in your tank. Putting a clam in there is not going to really skyrocket the need of calcium or alkalinity or magnesium in the tank any more than it would be any other hard coral that you put in there. We often have hundreds, if not 1,000 clams in stock, and I really don't see that much of an extra demand. Granted, our system is obviously quite large. We're growing thousands of corals. This is just our outside greenhouse area, and then we have the inside area as well. But really, it's putting 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 clams in a tank is not going to put a huge demand on that tank. So that's another kind of a misconception out there. You should over time start seeing some new growth on the clam, and that's going to be a brighter, whiter area at the edge here where the mantle is. That's another indication that the clam obviously is growing and healthy and happy. But generally, if they attach, that's probably the best sign that the clam is doing well. If it had been attached and falls off, it may just want to move to a new site. That can be normal, but if it doesn't reattach again fairly soon, that's not a good sign. Generally, you know, they're going to be very reactive to light. So if you cast a shadow over them, they're going to close up. But that's not always the best indication of health. But it's okay. You know, you get some idea if they're still, you know, moving at least. If they're not moving, that's not a good sign. But it could be that just somebody, you know, did this over them 10 times in a row, and then they're not going to react any longer. That often happens like at a frag swap when we bring clams. And by the way, we're going to bring quite a few of these to Reef Palooza, New York, which is June 22nd and 23rd. We'll have several hundred clams there, so if you're going to be in the area, stop by. We're going to have lots of corals as well as clams. So if you have any questions on keeping clams, feel free to contact me. It's Dr. Mack at PacificEastAquaculture.com. Take care.